When I think about the worst game in a franchise, a couple of things come to mind. What about the game do people not like? Are the mechanics counterintuitive, or does the gameplay just feel clunky? With a game like Dragon Ball Sagas, it fails on a lot of levels. Poor map design, infinite invisible walls, a poor combat system, not the greatest story, but with that game at least it's playable. Dragon Ball Z Taiketsu is not playable, at least not in any meaningful way. Released on the Game Boy Advance in 2003 by Webfoot Technologies, Dragon Ball Z Taiketsu is a fighting game in the loosest terms possible. It features 15 characters, though only 7 are unlocked from the start, and it has 10 battle stages, which isn't bad for a GBA fighting game. The music is fine enough, if not a little bit crushed, and based on just the menu, the game looks fine. If only we could stop there. There are a variety of modes as well. There's Tournament, where you pick your character and then fight 7 randomly selected CPU fighters. Once you beat them all, you get an excruciatingly slow text wall that describes how your character is feeling. Vegeta looked at the destruction all around him, but somehow he had come to love this little blue marble. I must be hanging around Kakarot too much, he muttered to himself. There's Endurance mode, where you fight as many characters as you can without getting your health back in between fights. There's Timed Challenges, which are pretty much the same as Tournament mode, but timed. There's also Sparring, which just allows you to practice combos, and then there's Endurance x2, which is just Endurance mode with twice as many enemies. All the modes seem fine enough, even if they're a bit copy-pasted feeling, but the real pain begins once you actually start to play. Starting off, what the fuck are these character models? They look like 90s action figures got digitized into Tron and then shit out of a Magnavox Odyssey. Vegeta has Gigantanoggin, and Android 18 looks like one of those melted Sonic ice creams. Honestly, my biggest problem with the character models is that Webfoot Technologies, the developer of this game, also made Dragon Ball Z: The Legacy of Goku, and while that game also has some major problems, it looks good. This game looks like shit. Even on original hardware, you'd think it would look better, but it just doesn't. So once you pick your character, you can get into a match. And yep, in a room packed with elephants, we found another. The gameplay sucks. This is a limitation of fighting games on the Game Boy Advance in general, but there's just not enough buttons for a fighting game. In all of its infinite wisdoms, the game's compromise for straight up not having enough input option is to awkwardly bind anything that's not a punch or a kick to button combinations. A and B are kick and punch respectively, but holding down and A gives you a roundhouse kick, and down and B gives you a low punch. Forward and L of all things is the throw, and forward and B is a chop. Down, forward, and B is the key blast, and down, down, up, and B sends you to a sky battle where if the CPU decides to comply, you engage in a clash. Pretty much just whoever presses the buttons faster wins. Once you wanted to get into actual combinations and special attacks though, you're in for a headache. Something as simple as the Kamehameha has been relegated to the equivalent of mashing your keyboard in hopes that you end up writing Shakespeare. Down, forward, B, by the way. Want to do Android 18's level 3 attack? Forward, down, back, forward, L. Like, honestly, they shouldn't have been that complicated, especially when in this game you need to be very accurate with your timing on the super attacks. Half the time they just don't work at all, and if you sit there for too long charging your key while also trying to do these stupid button inputs, you're totally open to attack and the CPU doesn't mess up the inputs. If they have their key charged up, assume that they will level 3 super attack you and kill you in one hit. No, there is in fact only one way to play Dragon Ball Z Taiketsu. Spam the kick over and over until they die.
Oh, you just kick Krillin in the balls.
Listen, there are times when you're at the mercy of the controls. Maybe your combo move isn't working, or maybe you just can't handle the jank. Spamming either the kick or roundhouse effectively stun locks them, and eventually, if either their health runs out or the timer runs out, you will win. Some characters like Android 18 have less range with her normal kick, and it sort of pushes her back a bit.
2 out of 10 for spam ability.
I'm not a fucking IGN reviewer, dude.
Gets the job done, but could have been open world.
I would have fucking shot myself if this game was open world.
Don't you know? It's a 2 out of 10 if it's not open world, no matter how empty and dead that open world is.
But when you do the roundhouse, she has more range than the normal kick. Rest assured, you can spam just one move with pretty much every character. No need for combos, no need for super attacks. If you keep stun locking them, they can't charge ki, and without ki, they can't super attack. This game is very, very broken, and honestly, it's frustrating. When basic functions of the game, like super attacks, are relegated to essentially their own minigame, you've got yourself a problem. And I know some of you will say, well, other fighting games use combinations like this even when they have more buttons, but this is no Mortal Kombat. If you want an example of a DBZ fighting game done right on the GBA, look no further than Dragon Ball Z's Supersonic Warriors. Almost none of the special attacks require D-pad combos, instead they often use different combinations of L and R with A and B. I would much rather have to press R and then A and then B than have to basically do a full circle on the D-pad and then either A or B. It's counterintuitive. Honestly, Supersonic Warriors does pretty much everything better than Taiketsu. It even has more characters, featuring 20 as opposed to 15, and they all handle way better than Taiketsu. Another thing, they can actually transform. You know that thing that became pretty integral to the plot of the show it's based on? In Taiketsu, besides using super attacks and having Goku and Vegeta briefly going Super Saiyan, there's no transformations to be seen, with the exception of Broly, who is always in his Super Saiyan form. I'm sure when I was a kid, I would have been fine with this game. It's certainly less frustrating than the first Legacy of Goku, but that's just because the game is needlessly difficult. This game isn't difficult at all. By the time you figure out the stun lock thing, it boils down to a button mashing contest where your thumbs are more likely to wear out before you actually lose a match. If you wanted to, you could also hook up another GBA via link cable and have one-on-one fights with your friends. Good luck finding anyone who owns this piece of shit. Beyond the actual gameplay, if you want to call it that, there are some other things to hold you over. There's an image gallery where you can look at images. 20 of them to be exact. Why you would want to do that is beyond me. Next up, there's the jukebox, so you can listen to this awful bit-crushed music that plays every single match anyways. That's cool, I guess. Remember when I said there were other things to hold you over? Yeah, that was it. There's also a couple of bonus settings that give you unlimited supers in fights and stuff like that. At the time, there was a fairly decent marketing push for this game. It was advertised as the first Dragon Ball Z game to feature Broly, and while that was true for the United States, he had appeared in Super Butoden 2 on the Super Famicom. Despite being panned by critics at the time, the game was a financial success, selling 608,000 copies. There were rumors that Taiketsu was rushed for the holidays, and I think that honestly makes sense. After making 5, yes, count them 5 Dragon Ball Z games on the Game Boy Advance, Webfoot Technology stopped working on DBZ games altogether. It really frustrates me because 3 of those games are great, if not repetitive. I know they were capable of making a great DBZ game, but for one reason or another, it just didn't happen. Today, Webfoot doesn't do much, as the last game they developed was a Legend of Korra game for the 3DS. Is Dragon Ball Z Taiketsu the worst DBZ game out there? While maybe it's not as agonizing as Saga's or as difficult as Legacy of Goku, Taiketsu fails on almost every level. The gameplay, the level design, the music, the features, it's all so subpar that it's not worth playing at all. Beyond being a collector, I don't think there's much anyone could get out of this game. If I have to take a look at this Funko Pop looking motherfucker any longer, I'm gonna seppuku myself and everyone around.